The Washington Post reports former President George W. Bush is making calls this morning ahead of the final confirmation vote next week in support. Bush reportedly rallying support from Republican Senators Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, and Lisa Murkowski, along with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. Key votes to Kavanaugh's confirmation.
Fox News alert. Breaking news rocking Washington, D.C. as two key senators will vote yes to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia announcing their decisions just moments ago. Here's a little portion of Senator Collins' speech.
I listened carefully to Christine Blasey Ford's testimony before the Judiciary Committee. I found her testimony to be sincere, painful, and compelling. I believe that she is a survivor of a sexual assault and that this trauma has upended her life. Nevertheless, the four witnesses she named could not corroborate any of the events of that evening gathering where she says the assault occurred.
Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. Sergeant at Arms has restored order in the galleries. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery. The clerk may continue.
I'm Sarah Kendzior, a journalist and scholar of authoritarian states, focusing on the former Soviet Union. I'm also the author of the book, The View from Flyover Country.
I'm Andrea, a writer, filmmaker, and activist, and we are the show that stares disaster in the face.
Yes, this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast examining corruption in the Trump administration and the rise of authoritarianism across the world. And this is a big week for that. Today, we will be discussing, yet again, Brett Kavanaugh and what his confirmation means for the continuing assault on truth and justice in the U.S., as well as interviewing a writer whose commitment to truth and justice we've long admired, Sadet Harry, who Andrea and I spoke with in August about digital media, race, and how to survive in an autocracy, among other topics. So her interview is coming up later in the show. But back to Kavanaugh. This is the third episode in a row we've done on this subject because Kavanaugh's confirmation is a seminal moment in U.S. history, a moment we have dreaded since November 2016. This week marked the most deadly blow yet against checks and balances. An independent, uncompromised judiciary, which until now had served as the strongest bulwark America had against rising authoritarianism, is dying in real time. And so, shortly after the confirmation, I wrote an article on Kavanaugh's exploits for the Globe and Mail. And so, just to kind of get you guys up to date, I'm going to read a little bit of that. The confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh was at heart a referendum on the integrity of U.S. institutions and the impunity of elites, and the U.S. failed. Senators who purport to believe in rule of law vouched for a judge who sees himself as above it. Senators who purport to believe in democracy honored a man who degrades it, and did so in deference to a man seemingly attempting to destroy it, President Trump. Checks and balances are nearly gone. The executive branch was long ago corrupted, the independent legislature neutered by a GOP majority nakedly seeking one-party rule. Until now, the judiciary had been the strongest bulwark against autocracy, having struck down many of Trump's unconstitutional executive orders during his first year. The Trump administration responded by packing the courts, appointing right-wing judges to lifetime appointments, and purging attorneys they viewed as opponents. Kavanaugh is the final nail in that coffin. This is now Trump's Supreme Court, run on white male entitlement and alternative facts. Kavanaugh is expected to act as Trump's legal lackey, exonerating him regardless of the charge or evidence. His appointment may not only end the efficacy of the Mueller probe, but curtail other attempts to prosecute Trump or his aides on state charges, due to a case, Gamble versus the United States, that the Supreme Court is set to hear this term. Autocrats rewrite the law so they're no longer breaking it, and they hire and fire accordingly. This is why I've been warning for years that Trump, whose seemingly autocratic consolidation grows stronger every day, was akin to a criminal able to elect his own judge or delay his own trial, and now he has. This is why a purge of the FBI was followed by a sham FBI investigation into Justice Kavanaugh, reminiscent of those of authoritarian states, with key witnesses and evidence ignored. So there's more where that comes from, and we're going to be discussing it from a number of angles, but I want to know your reaction, Andrea, to the news of last week.
My heart goes out to anybody who's, listening to all of this from abroad, watching from abroad, and just wondering, how did Americans get themselves into this mess? Maybe you've met a few Americans and you might consider us, based on those few encounters, pretty nice people, some decent people. The majority of our country is filled with wonderful human beings, and we know that because the polls show again and again that the majority of Americans were against Brett Kavanaugh. And the majority of our country is actually quite in favor of typically more liberal policies, a more liberal direction, a fairer, freer America for all. The problem, though, is that we have a very outdated system of voting. And nothing illustrates this more and what a crisis this is than the two most unpopular presidents in America's history, George W. Bush and Donald Trump, who both, of course, lost the popular vote, shoving through Kavanaugh, a alleged attempted rapist, onto the Supreme Court. We have a serious problem of accountability in America. I just really hope that a movement finally grows out to sort of confront this once and for all, because we can't really sustain any more of being held hostage by the minority in our country.
No, we can't. And one of the frustrating things is that, a recommendation that would normally be made is take this to the Supreme Court, take these problems to the Supreme Court, have them, do something about gerrymandering, about election integrity, about voter suppression, about voting rights. All of these major decisions, they're now going to be made once more by a compromised actor, by somebody who has no real allegiance to the law, the Constitution, the public. His allegiance is to himself, to the Republican Party, which he made very clear during his hearing, and to Trump. So I don't know where accountability will come from, if it comes from anywhere at all.
No. And he's vindictive like Trump. You saw him in that snarling performance he gave to Congress. He's somebody that is going to punish us for our opposition and for our stand for decency. He's going to have no problem doing that. We've been talking a lot of how this has been impacting women on a personal level, and there's been a lot of calls out there for survivors to really focus on self-care, and anybody who's a partner or family of a survivor to really Google the words holding space for someone. Right now is a really important time to just be patient and provide unconditional support for survivors. They just need you to hold space for them right now, because this is an incredibly difficult time and it's not going to go away. Every decision that goes to Supreme Court, we're going to be reminded of this again and again. So survivors, practice self-care and teach your partners, teach those around you, your friends, your family, about holding space for you, because that's really what we need right now. There's a saying that if a man can't fuck you, he'll find some other way to fuck you. And what that means is strong women tend to go through life camouflaging themselves. They soften their voices. They tone police their emails. They tone police themselves generally. They try to shrink themselves any way they can in business, not to sort of trigger a man's, threat of strong women. Of course, men play dominance games with each other in the world of business, but for whatever reason, one thing that you hear common complaints about and that you can observe is that with women, it tends to be like a casual sport, more for fun. The behavior is more obnoxious and inappropriate and dehumanizing. And so with America not wanting Brett Kavanaugh, now he's going to make us pay for it. It's coming. The temper tantrum is not over. He's going to find some other way to fuck us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about everything you said. And I think that he made that clear. And I think the vindictiveness goes two ways. Obviously goes towards the Democrats, towards the Clintons, which he explicitly called out during the hearing. But I think it goes towards women in general and towards strong women and the idea that
putting us in our place. It's putting us in our place. It's flaunting their power.
That we have no inherent worth, no inherent rights. It's what he'll bestow on us.
Yeah. A great metaphor for it is what Kavanaugh himself was accused of doing by multiple witnesses at a party, shoving his penis in someone's face. And that's basically what the far-right minority that is holding our country hostage through these archaic voting laws that came out of the original sin of slavery, the Electoral College. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that the propaganda apparatus that surrounds him reminds me of what he was accused of doing to Ford. They're covering our mouths and turning up the music so that they can't hear the screams. And they're doing this more and more since the confirmation. At least last week, there was a kind of widespread recognition of the pain that people, especially women, obviously, were going through. There was a lot of testimony from survivors, and there was a kind of reluctance to denigrate Ford. Her credibility was widely accepted, even among the Republicans who were voting for him anyway. They were going with this lunatic theory of mistaken identity. Once Trump mocked her and degraded her, and let me emphasize, that is the thing that traumatized her most about the attempted rape, was the mockery and the laughter. Once he did that, that stopped happening, and she was treated like utter garbage. And now it's as if the Republicans, and not just the sort of Fox News media, but the media in general, are trying to forget all that happened, forget Trump's speech, forget her testimony, forget his snarling testimony, and kind of chalk it up to a bad day. They're doing the presidential pivot nonsense with Kavanaugh. They're trying to pretend that that was some exception to the rule, but that is the rule. That is who he actually is and who he's going to be, and that's going to underlie all of his decisions and his behavior. So do not let down your guard. Do not fall for this horse shit that people are going to be spewing out. And I think some people just don't want to confront this. They don't want to confront that somebody that cruel and vindictive and unqualified and belligerent is on the Supreme Court. So they're just going to pretend that that's not who he is, especially these DC elites who've had him in their social circles, for such a long time. But we saw who he was. He revealed who he was. He took off the mask. So when you see him, you remember that moment, because they will gaslight you. This is why we have this podcast, is to kind of clarify these tactics, because they can be effective and they certainly can be traumatic, as any survivor could attest.
Right. You just have to confront their efforts to normalize this. And Susan Collins, what was she promised? Everyone needs to watch Susan Collins moving forward. How was she convinced? And I almost wonder if it was just George W. Bush calling her up or just reminding her of when the Republican Party had some self-respect and maybe giving her a feeling of normalcy again, and that everything was going to be all right, and that the Republicans were in control. Because even though they have all the power, this is a party that looks and must certainly feel very much out of control. And so maybe the reassuring call, the charm offensive of that war criminal, George W. Bush, calling up Susan Collins, maybe that was something that helped tip her over the edge. I don't know, but it's clear that the way she demeaned herself in her remarks on the Senate floor and basically defied science, saying that she believes that Dr. Ford was attacked, but that she doesn't remember her attacker. In response to that, experts were weighing in saying that's not normally how it's done. Victims of attempted assaults or assaults, they do remember their attackers, especially if they knew that person to begin with. So Susan Collins' embarrassing performance was very much another example of Republicans lying about science. It reminded me of climate change and how the Republicans handle it. It's the science on sexual assault survivors, it's very clear. This is a trauma that gets embedded in your brain. It can change your personality, and it doesn't go away. She broke the hearts of millions of Americans, not just women, but the majority of us that believe in basic decency.
Yeah, I thought it was a cruel speech. It was obviously written in advance. The first half of it, I think, was written during a time before the allegations came forward, but then she just continued along that logic. And, the press often treats this as a performance, as this sort of, little drama, this soap opera that's going on, this will she, won't she. But it's our lives. It's the rest of our lives, you and me. It's my children's lives. It's my daughter having fewer rights than my son. This is a fight for their future. It's young people, who've already lost more than they ever had the chance to know. That's what's at stake. And so, I'll never forgive that. I don't know the motivation behind it. I think it might be something along the lines of, just clinging to the party line of this kind of tribal loyalty, and of her maybe needing to convince herself that what she witnessed in his testimony was not as, disgusting as what it was. It doesn't matter in the end why. What matters is what she did and, what we're going to have to do going forward, because this affects so many things, women's rights, voting rights, civil rights, decades of progress being pushed backward by this court. And another thing I wanted to ask you about is how you think this is going to affect Trump and his own legal battles and the Mueller probe going forward.
Well, that's what this is about. I mean, that's really what this is about. For me, this felt like a very big Citizens United moment, that Supreme Court decision that said, yes, a corporation is a person, which opened the floodgates to all this dark money that's been tilting our elections across the board. Citizens United gave birth to Donald Trump. And so what will Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court give birth to? What sort of spawn of Satan is coming for us? And I think very much protecting the president and his family in the Mueller investigation. I think that's where this is all headed. And just in connection to that, what you saw with the total farce of the FBI pretending to do an investigation into Brett Kavanaugh, with multiple witnesses saying that they were willing to help, they're willing to provide their own testimony and not being heard. So what you saw this past week was the FBI behaving in such a way that it was almost like it was revealing that it was scared and that it's under control by the President of the United States. Because if they really wanted justice, they really wanted to get to the bottom of this, they would have done a proper investigation. They would have called for these witnesses that were begging to talk, begging to share their stories about Kavanaugh. They wouldn't have put any restrictions on an investigation into someone who has multiple accusers and would be living out the rest of his life until for decades to come on the Supreme Court. And so, yes, I definitely think that this was, again, a reminder this week, this sham FBI investigation in Kavanaugh, that Robert Mueller is not coming to save you. Robert Mueller is not coming to save any of us. And honestly, the only power we have left is, and it is a very strong, substantial power. We have infinite power, in my opinion, from studying movements against authoritarianism, across history, across countries. We in America have it still very, 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 very good. And we have a lot of rights and a lot of things that we could take advantage of to fight back and really pluck these guys out, pluck out the corruption. And I know that from my years of research and my own work, but I had a really sort of bittersweet evening with some friends from Russia who escaped Russia for a better life in the US. And we forgot our troubles and had a great night. And of course, the conversation kept coming back to Putin and Trump. And it's just surreal for them that they left Russia to come to the US. And now that same kleptocracy is creeping in and accelerating here in a country they thought where they could be safe, a country they looked to for refuge. And it's a scary feeling of not knowing where you could hide. But at the same time, what they were telling me was just a reminder, Fox News is awful, Fox News is grotesque, but they still have some criticism of the President of the United States. They don't even have that on Russian state TV at all. It's just a total pro-Putin carnival. And so we still have a lot of relative freedom in the US, and we can't take that for granted, because not taking that for granted is our superpower right now, and taking advantage of everything that we still have and just fighting like hell through that. That's desperately what we need as a country, because the power is now on us. The media is letting us down with this lack of empathy and falling in lockstep to normalizing Trump and his every move. And the checks and balances are getting eroded, so it's up to us now.
We need to use every remaining right, every last freedom that we have in order to fight this. And I've been, saying that for a while. I mean, I think anyone who has history either living in or, having a lot of friends who are from authoritarian states knows to not take those rights for granted. What frightens me is that we are emulating, the path of power that Putin had in Russia. And you can't make, exact comparisons, obviously. The U.S. has a different history. We have a different electoral structure, all these different things. But the way he consolidated power, this brutal kleptocracy, this mixture of criminal elements, of businesses and billionaires, and of, gradually eroding away at what rights Russians had. And again, you can't quite make this comparison because their rights were relatively new. Their democracy was a new phenomenon. But, they ate away at them. I was thinking about this week because it's the 12th anniversary of the death of Anna Politkovskaya, murdered on Putin's birthday in 2006, and about, the relative rights and freedoms that they had in the decades prior to that and how much it accelerated. And I feel like now we're entering this new era, not just for the US, but for the world, where you have former democracies like the United States, and to some degree Britain, and certainly Poland and Hungary and Turkey, to the degree that those are democracies, aligning with overt autocracies like Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, North Korea. We have Trump proclaiming, his, I guess, romantic love between him and Kim Jong-un. We have this axis of autocrats that's growing, and that I think is, in a kind of way, it's eating away at the possibilities we have to reverse this. They have their own economy, an economy of stocks and of Bitcoin that kind of floats above that of citizens that have jobs and wages. They have kleptocratic inherited wealth. They have dynasties, and they have no accountability. And that's one of the most frustrating things, is that this isn't a new phenomenon. This is something that's been brewing for decades. It's especially been brewing since about 2008 when the market crashed. In episode 3 of the show, we talk about how Mueller gave a speech about this new nexus of criminality, corporations, and government, and how, they are forging with the Russian mafia kind of unstoppable force. And I'm just kind of like, who's left to bring that accountability? And with regards to Mueller, who is investigating all of these things, this is a transnational investigation. It's not only about Americans. We've seen them indict Russians and other international figures as well. When that report is finished, who will see it? Who will read it? Will the public get to see it? Will it make its way to Congress? If Congress especially is dominated by the Republicans, if it goes to the Supreme Court, then what happens? I think we know now. We know what will happen if any kind of thing that threatens Trump reaches the Supreme Court. We already know the verdict in advance. That is a defining feature of an autocracy, is to always know the verdict in advance. And it's one of the most disheartening things. And I am still startled that Mueller did not move faster, because they have been working on this for a very long time. People think this investigation started in May 2017. That's incorrect. They were looking at a lot of these players for, well over a decade. And they must have seen this coming. They must have seen this erosion of possibility happening right before our eyes and its effect on millions of people. And I just don't get it. I'm just gonna, as you said, don't put your faith in a man. Don't put your faith in Mueller either. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, look at Don Jr. Don Jr. is walking around campaigning in the midterms when legal experts are pointing to the fact that, maybe he should have been indicted by now. If you read legal experts breaking down what he did. So let me just read from the New York Times, because this tells you everything about how much faith you should be putting into Mueller's investigation. So I'm quoting now from the New York Times. It is a felony to lie to Congress. In a September 2017 interview before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Donald Trump Jr. was asked whether any other foreign governments or nationals offered assistance to the Trump campaign, or whether he had directly or indirectly sought such foreign assistance for the campaign. He said he had not. Then again, he may have committed conspiracy. The article also says conspiracy, an agreement by 2 or more people to commit a crime, whether or not they end up doing so, a powerful tool for prosecutors. Conspiracy charges allow them to hold each conspirator responsible for illegal acts committed by others in the circle as part of the arrangement. To convict someone of such a conspiracy, prosecutors would need to obtain evidence of an agreement to commit a specific crime. A provision of the Federal Election Campaign Act, Section 30121 of Title 52, broadly outlaws donations or other contributions of, quote, a thing of value by any foreigner in connection with an American election, or even express or implied promise to take an action directly or indirectly. Depending on how a grand jury interprets the facts, the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III, has gathered about the two Trump Tower meetings. It could find that the foreigners violated that law and that Donald Trump Jr. conspired in that offense. So when the Russians said, hey, we have dirt on Hillary Clinton, and Donald Jr. is like, that's great, let's meet, and they have meetings about it, and next thing you know, the Russians are dumping their emails and weaponizing them against Trump's opponent, and doing this with a strategy to distract from the Access Hollywood crime by the Pussy Tape, for instance. This is a clear quid pro quo going on. And yet Don Jr. is out there shaking hands, campaigning for Republicans in the midterm election. So the fact that he hasn't been nabbed yet, hasn't been indicted, that just tells you how much strength and power Mueller's investigation has in this beleaguered FBI.
There's no reason he shouldn't be indicted. He should be indicted for that. There are other figures who are being investigated, like Hope Hicks, who just took a lucrative job with Fox News. There are lifetime mobsters like Felix Sater, who are going and giving guest lectures at Berkeley and going to parties hosted by New York socialites. And then you have people in the administration, and these are, the people I think are the most dangerous. People like Jeff Sessions, who lied on his security forms, another easy case where you can indict, as well as his role as a foreign policy advisor during the Trump campaign, meeting illicitly with Russians like Ambassador Kislyak. You have, I think, the most dangerous person besides Trump in this administration, Jared Kushner, who also lied on his security forms, likely sold state secrets, has been conspiring with terrible people all over the world. Is it just a tremendous danger, not just to the U.S., but to the world at large? And nothing has happened to him. If Mueller were to indict him, I would feel a lot better about this investigation, because I would feel like it was living up to the commitment of what a special prosecutor should do, which is, serve and protect the American people from harm, because harm is being levied upon us by these people who act with utter impunity.
It's unbelievable where we are today. It's almost surreal. This Judiciary Committee is no longer an independent branch of government, and we're supposed to be. The Senate's supposed to be an independent, equal branch of government. We're no longer that, but we're an arm, and a very weak arm, of the Trump White House. Every semblance of independence has just disappeared. It's gone. And I think that is something historians will look at, and they'll call it a turning point in the United States Senate.
We saw this week in a somewhat indirect way with the murder of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi Arabian embassy in Istanbul. Of course, Kushner is one of the people responsible for building this new relationship with Saudi Arabia, cozying up to people like Mohammed bin Salman and, basically helping him pull off a coup last year. And now Khashoggi is dead. For those who don't know who he was a well-known Saudi Arabian journalist. He was recently writing for the Washington Post, who critiqued the Saudi Arabian regime, but didn't see himself as a political dissident. He just saw himself, and was somebody who just wanted a better way of life for Saudi Arabians. I'm going to read a couple sentences from a September 2017 column that he wrote for the Washington Post when he was essentially living in exile. He says, "It was painful for me several years ago when several friends were arrested. I said nothing. I didn't want to lose my job or my freedom. I worried about my family. I've made a different choice now. I've left my home, my family, and my job, and I'm raising my voice. To do otherwise would betray those who languish in prison. I can speak when so many cannot. I want you to know that Saudi Arabia has not always been as it is now. We Saudis deserve better." And so now he's dead. He was tortured and he was murdered. And this act was likely carried out by a brutal regime that Kushner has enabled. And so, there are consequences to letting these guys get away, with all of these machinations, with not clamping down on blatant criminality. We'll never, I think anyone hearing those sentences, would recognize the pain that he was in and the bravery it took to write them and the loss, of this man as a writer, as an individual, and as somebody who valued, his dignity and just wanted a better way of life for his country. I mean, it's such a simple prospect, and it's something that this band, this axis of autocrats, is dedicated to destroying.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a reminder that rhetoric matters. Rhetoric matters. And so when you have this destruction of values, like this domino effect of states falling to the far right and attacking journalists, attacking opposition leaders, it spreads. Those values spread. So when the president attacks journalists, the president of the United States, that's giving permission for corruption out there to flourish and to take out journalists, and it normalizes that.
We've seen that from the start. I mean, it shouldn't come as a surprise. During the campaign, Trump was encouraging, his most rabid followers to physically assault journalists and saying he would pay the legal fees. And in the last few weeks, he's been ramping up that kind of rhetoric at rallies, extending it beyond journalists to attacks on anybody he sees as opposition, including Democrats. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. If there was some sense of accountability, whether it's merely, losing support in the election, losing votes, but also just, going to jail for murdering somebody, then maybe we would feel more secure, but just as we were talking about this sham FBI investigation that happened, it doesn't feel like there's anywhere to go to if you're threatened. And, you and I have both been threatened, and your sister has been threatened. And a lot of those threats were fairly severe. And I don't think we've ever told anyone the full story, and maybe we'll save that for another day. But, one of the most frightening things about that experience was knowing how alone we were, that there wasn't a trustworthy body to turn to, that there wasn't anywhere to get protection beyond, hiring private security. And a lot of other journalists have come forward with their own stories. It's this thing. It's this thing that kind of, seethes underneath all this horse race rhetoric and palace intrigue tales. There are a lot of terrified U.S. journalists, and rightfully so. And I think that they are people who don't know how to deal with authoritarian states. I see writers who come from states that either experienced extreme violence or authoritarianism. They recognize the signs. They know, how to cover it, and they know to some extent, to the best that they can, how to protect themselves. But I think a lot of journalists are in denial because it is so scary. And if you confront it head on, you have to sort of reevaluate everything you've thought of about your country and everything you do in terms of your daily life and your self-protection.
Yeah, and it's not only that we felt threatened, but also turning to people in the media in 2016 for help to get the story out. Some were just thought we were crazy. And one friend in the media actually wanted to do an intervention with me and told me in November 2016, and after Trump won, she's like, you need to stop with this Russia stuff.
Oh, I had so many people telling me that. I remember after the election, Foreign Policy wanted me to write an article about comparisons between Uzbekistan's dictator and Trump as a kleptocrat. And so I was tentatively agreeing to do this, but I said, what you really need to examine are Paul Manafort and Russia. The story was dropped. It's really important. You need to look at this. It's much more enormous in scope than anybody is giving credit. And, Russia very likely interfered in this election. And, that was an email I wrote on November 10th or something. And he wrote back and said that I was a lunatic that needed psychiatric help. I think he used hysterical. It was so gendered. So of course I just went and wrote about it for somewhere else. So bye, Foreign Policy. I haven't written for you since then. Who's hysterical now? But it's incredibly frustrating. And so I go through this kind of mixed emotions of pity and protectiveness for other journalists, because I think no matter who you are, well, maybe not like Sean Hannity, but like most people, I don't want to see anybody getting killed. I don't want to see anybody getting harmed or getting censored or threatened or any of that. But in order for that to happen, we need to stick together. We need to recognize that this is an unacceptable threat, and that when one journalist is threatened, all journalists are threatened. And I don't think that people are quite there yet. And then meanwhile, we have this wave of killings of journalists across the world. It happened in Malta earlier in the year, and it happened this week in Bulgaria. Bulgarian journalist Viktoria Marinova was killed, and she, like the other journalists who have been killed, was investigating corruption. She's the third high-profile journalist to be killed in the EU this year, the fourth since the start of 2017. And it's a frightening thing because that's what, we're looking into as well. And, what other journalists are looking into and what many have been shying away from because you face these type of potential repercussions. And that's a terrifying prospect.
And the dog whistles matter. If you, Chuck Grassley blaming,
oh God,
saying that protesters were funded by George Soros. Like that's the dog whistle that all the far right love. That's a dog whistle that unites Putin's far right and Trump's far right. And that is, the dog whistle of the Jewish banker. That's like the meme they've created around George Soros, Papa Soros, who funds us all.
What the hell are they going to do when Soros actually dies? All this shit just blows my mind because I'm kind of how did George Soros even become this mainstream figure? I first heard of Soros because I heard of Open Society and, they funded a lot of programs that helped human rights and journalism in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union, kind of a niche thing, not really the person I would have thought they'd choose as, the potential Satan, or the elders of Zion conspiracy stereotype. But yeah, I don't know what they're going to do when he's gone. And it's such a complicated phenomenon because people putting out the Soros anti-Semitic myths, it includes a lot of Jewish people in the Trump administration, people like Stephen Miller, like Kushner. You're hearing fascist-like rhetoric from Kushner's close friend Netanyahu. And so it's this really bizarre and double-sided phenomenon. And I guess my final word on it is just it's unacceptable in every respect. It doesn't matter who you are or, what you're intending. If you're making anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and trying to rile people up to kill Jewish journalists or to kill journalists in general, you're a despicable person. But it is an underexamined phenomenon, I think, in some respects, is exactly how did this narrative get started?
No, white extremist groups are the most dangerous terrorists in America right now. And then you had, just this past week, a Jewish school in Virginia being vandalized, being tagged with swastikas. This is why the dog whistling, the normalization, all of it, the gaslighting, it matters. And the only successful trickle down that the Republicans have ever been able to achieve is the trickle down of their hate, the white supremacy coming down. And that's really what they've unleashed here.
What has gone on here, Senator? I mean, you've had people thrown out of restaurants. You've had people shamed and criticized online, and obviously protesters in your face. First off, do you believe George Soros is behind all of this, paying these people to get you and your colleagues in elevators or wherever they can get in your face?
I have heard so many people believe that. I tend to believe it. I believe it fits in his attack mode that he has and how he uses his billions and billions of resources.
I think it's really sort of interesting reminder that it's in everyone's best interest to take care of the most vulnerable in a society. And let's just examine the FBI for a second and its history. So if you look at sort of the FBI on how its own history of racism in America, how it harassed Martin Luther King, how it tried to silence him, how it worked with the Chicago PD to assassinate Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party. And then, of course, they've infiltrated Black communities. They've had this whole history of racism. And so it's really interesting to me is now, because they've had those values for so long, it's just this horrible irony that now they're essentially being held hostage by that racism now, by the racist in chief in the White House. They can't do anything now. That's what they've showed us with this Kavanaugh investigation. So it just goes to show that you have to really watch the values that you keep because it can come back to haunt you. You can become a victim of the hate that you're putting out there in the world. And that's really what this reminded me of this past week.
Yeah, and I'm afraid of this. Like, as you said, the FBI has a very mixed history and a very bad history, when it comes to race relations, civil rights, spying on, dissidents in the U.S. Who aren't doing anything more than trying to fight for a better way of life. But you also, of course, have, the FBI, at least until recently, clamping down on the mafia, clamping down on militia groups, on white terrorist groups, and Trump not wanting them to do that, redefining the terms of terrorism, labeling everything Islamic extremism, and really not wanting them to investigate white supremacist terrorist groups or people committing hate crimes, like the people, spray painting swastikas on buildings or desecrating Jewish cemeteries or desecrating mosques. Because those are his voters, and he also, it's meant to make a shift in political culture. And so I've been trying to figure out, what's been going on with the FBI since 2016, because there does seem to be such an internal fissure, such a divide, where it's clear there are people who are trying to do the job that they're tasked with of keeping Americans safe, of keeping our freedom safe. And then others who seem to be acting as, Trump's internal operatives, for those, who are interested. Earlier episodes of the podcast, I think in episode 2, we talk about some very bizarre rhetoric that came out around the time Comey released his second email, the one, claiming that Hillary was being investigated, that, a former State Department official came out and said, we've held an internal coup in the FBI. Like, we, meaning the Trump camp, control the FBI now. And he was dismissed as an insane conspiracy theorist. But you have to remember that insane conspiracy theorists are Trump's advisors. This is a guy, he invites Alex Jones to the White House to, give his thoughts on national affairs. This is mainstream. The fringes got pulled to the center. And so I really wonder, what's happened with the FBI, how trustworthy they are, and how much independence do they have now? Could they have done more when it comes to Kavanaugh? I've heard mixed things about this. Or are they merely a constrained organ of the Trump administration, not on their own volition? But either way, if that's what they are, then again, we're in a lot of trouble. Then it comes back to the Mueller probe, and that has its own limitations. And so, it's enormously frustrating, both about Trump's crimes not being investigated, but also the broader threat to public safety. When the most vulnerable citizens, non-white citizens, immigrants, anyone who's of a persecuted group are able to be persecuted without consequence. That's a nightmare. That's, antithetical to anything this country should stand for. And I guess I just wish I knew what ground we stood on.
And just to be clear, there are really good men and women across the FBI, and they depend on trust in their local communities to do their investigations. And, my heart really goes out to them because they are patriots, they are decent people, and this is a critical time in our country. And if there's any consolation, it's taking the long view in history. And America has a history of burning itself down and then rebuilding. And right now, the Republic is on fire. But of course, the people who are always on the front lines of this are people of color, especially women. And just a reminder, as exhausted as you may be, if you feel like you've been fighting for so long and that you're just poisoned by the surreal news cycle, the best thing you can do right now is sure, stay in your despair for a bit, but then get out as soon as you can, and just choose faith over despair. And just any little action you can take, whether going to a campaign near you and just adding your energy, just bringing, you need to be the cavalry now. We need the cavalry to come in. And especially look out for campaigns of people of color or any sort of community organization, especially with women of color. They have been on the front lines protecting us for a very long time, and they're going to continue to do it because their lives literally depend on it. But you just can understand, being a human being yourself, that they must be exhausted. So anything you can do to lend your energy, lend your spirit, lend any sort of encouragement, and just get in there and say, how can I help you? What do you need help with? That's what we're talking about don't lose faith in your country. We still have a lot of resources to take advantage of to turn this around. We still have time. There absolutely is time. And just begin now and look past the midterms. This isn't just a sprint to the midterms. Take a longer view. Look over the next decade. 10 years from now, what kind of country do you want to have? And just start pulling this into your life. And I'm telling you, once you make the decision to choose service, to choose doing something instead of nothing, your entire life opens up. So for instance, on October 31st, 2016, I hit rock bottom emotionally. You all know that story. I ran to Ben & Jerry's and I dunked my face in a carton of ice cream. And if I had stayed in my despair a little too long, I might not have met Sarah Kendzior on Twitter. Okay, so that's how you get rewarded, by choosing faith over despair and just stepping out there into the world and saying, how can I help you? What can I do? And that's what we need to do over and over and over again. And another personal story I want to share really quickly. I just spent the last 14 years working on writing and producing an independent feature film, not a documentary, but a feature film. Even my own parents thought I was crazy for a very long time. There's nothing more depressing to immigrant parents than not becoming president of the United States or an anchor on the Today Show. Like, it was heartbreaking for them. And even into year 13 of this project, I still had people I respected looking at me as though I was like crazy, like patting me on the head. Oh, you have a screenplay, dear? That's nice. And I saw my friends in journalism that I started with speed past me and become editors at fancy magazines or get their own show on cable news. And meanwhile, I'm like juggling all these freelance assignments and feast or famine as a freelancer and like trying to get this film into production and just trying to get people to take me seriously. Well, we just wrapped production with the 3-time Academy Award nominee, an absolutely insanely talented cast. I've watched the final film several times this month alone, and it's an absolute, our director is a master filmmaker. It's Agnieszka Holland. She did Europa. People are comparing our film to her next Europa, which is a masterpiece. And so all of this is to say, independent filmmaking is a constant exercise day after day of staring disaster in the face and choosing faith over despair. I did that for 14 years. So for your next 14 years, you have to make that choice. We all have to make that choice of choosing faith over despair every single time. Another thing I want to say is, as a woman, we have a very hard time putting ourselves out there in the world. I felt very embarrassed and shy saying I have a screenplay, I want to produce it. So the thing that really got me to take myself seriously was, in the 2008 economic crash, I thought, okay, well, if I make this film, I'm going to be creating jobs and opportunities for people. And that was really like the pure intention I had that helped me get out into the world. And then on the last night, the very last night of production, the very last night we ended shooting the film in Scotland, one of our superstar angel production assistants, this brilliant guy, this Polish hipster kid whose poor job was to chase after me and help me get to where I needed to be. He's Polish, we spoke fluent English. And on that last night when we wrapped the film, he said to me that his father wanted him to become a coal miner, just like his father was. And his father imagined this whole life of him working in the coal mines of Poland. And instead, he got this job to work on a film, and he got so emotional that he had to take out his laptop and pull up Google Translate and type into Polish what he wanted to say, and it came out into English, "That's because of you that I have this job." That was one of the highlights of this entire 14-year journey. What it reminded me of, and what I want to just share, is whatever intention you begin a project with, a journey with, whatever intention you start with, that is what you'll end with. And so going into the midterms, it's not about the midterms. It's about what kind of country you want to create. We're burning right now. We're soon going to be ashes. America's burning down to the ground. So what kind of country do you want to now rebuild? What kind of future do you want? Do you want to get rid of the Electoral College? Do you want to create a living wage? Do you want green jobs? Do you want to turn your entire state government blue so you can enact all these great programs in your state without Mitch McConnell's interference? What do you want to do? What are your dreams right now for your country? Because every day for the next 14 years, you have to work towards those and start now with whatever that intention is, because it'll be there waiting for you 14 years from now.
Reach out to people in your community, put serving others first, put helping vulnerable people first, because you're not your job, you're how you treat people. And this is particularly important in an economy like ours, where jobs are hard to find. I mean, if you're basing your self-worth on external validation or, prestige, you're going to feel terrible. You need to find something else, and I think part of that lies in helping others. And I think part of that is in what you said. and having, big ideas and following your own values, your own beliefs, and to the extent you can, your own ambitions. And like you said, if those ambitions are thwarted, even repeatedly, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily dead. If there's something that's been driven home over the last few years, it's, life is precious and things can change very dramatically. And you shouldn't take, a moment that you have for granted. You should treasure that time and do what you want with it. And I think that means just dispelling with the notion that what other people think of you matters, especially women. This is a very tough time for us now. But, no man is the arbiter of your worth. And I hope that people know that. I get the sense sometimes that younger people see this with more clarity than older generations because, they've grown up without the delusions and the expectations that we had. And nowadays, those delusions and expectations are often one and the same. They have a very, pragmatic and grim view of reality. And I hate that that's the future they're walking into, and I want to do everything I can to change that future. But, I think that they also do, so it's important to support them. And just in general, we have to look out for each other. That's how I ended my op-ed this week is, we the people are the last remaining check. Everything else is either gone or it's compromised, but they can't change that. They can't change you, who you are inside, unless you let them. That's your power, and you should hold on to it with everything you got.
And I think we'll close now by just announcing our winner of our Gaslit Nation Crush the Midterms Challenge. So this is an important reminder that we are our own leaders now. Communities are leaders now. And thank you so much to the Gaslit Nation community for checking out crushthemidterms.org and making your plan in a matter of seconds to help create the blue waves from now until Election Day on November 6th. One woman tweeted at us that it was so easy to do. It's such a simple site that she was able to create her plan while blow drying her hair. There's nothing more zeitgeist than that.
Oh, yeah.
So we are going to announce the winner now. So we basically have as much scientific method for this as like a Republican meeting on sexual assault or climate change. So I've been retweeting all of the people that have been tweeting at us their Crush the Midterms plan. So I'm going to scroll down. And Sarah, do you just tell me to stop? And whichever one I stop on, that's the winner. Oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. Who's it going to be? Who is it going to be? So tell me when to stop.
Stop?
I stopped. Okay. So the winner of I hope this person responds. If not, we'll have to find a winner. So it's going to be EUthis. Congratulations. You get a signed copy of Sarah Kenzier's New York Times bestselling book, The View from Flyover Country. And you are at INDIGOIIS, and we will reach out to you relentlessly until we can get your home address and show up on your doorstep together and do a live podcast.
Aren't you lucky? You're going to really regret having participated in this exercise. But hey, free book. Congratulations.
Yeah, and so I'm going to ask Sarah right now in front of all of you, because it's the best way to pressure her to say yes. Can we continue this contest for another week, Sarah? Can we give out another copy?
Yes, I think we should. I think we should continue it weekly until the midterms.
Well, I agree.
Until the midterms are indeed crushed.
Yes, until we crush the soul of the far right in America. Yeah, that's the plan. So I also want to up the ante by introducing the 1,000 Doors Challenge. That is, of course, a moonshot, and Americans love their moonshots. So it's a stretch goal. So I'm going to try between now and November 6th to knock on 1,000 doors, because canvassing, going door to door, is the most effective way to reach people. And it's also the most fun. You get some exercise, fresh air, you check out some lovely gardens. And if you're nervous about it, most people just simply are not home. So you can listen to podcasts and music and, talk to maybe 10 people and just be polite. You're just introducing a candidate to someone. It's actually quite simple and fun. And so don't be intimidated by it. So we could even play a little bit of a clip of a group of Harvard students that created Resistance School that walks you through the simple steps of canvassing and how easy and simple and effective it is to helping create change. So we'll play a bit of that. So if you want to join me, Andrea, in the 1,000 Doors Challenge, we can do this together. Even if you do 200 doors between now and November 6th, that may still be 200 more doors than you even thought you could do. I mean, I'm up to 70. That's pretty good. I'm proud of myself. I'm working on 1,000. So if you're going to do the 1,000 Doors Challenge, tweet us a picture of yourself doing it, and we'll retweet it on Gaslit Nation. And we will be doing this together. And at the very end, on November 6th, Sarah and I are going to choose a winner of the 1,000 Doors Challenge from all the photos we get sent to us of people canvassing. And that winner will be invited onto our show after Election Day to talk about their experiences and what dreams and intentions they have for their country over the next 14 years and beyond.
Wow, that's going to be quite a show. I hope that I hope all works out well so that this person looks forward to this experience, or it could just be all three of us sobbing maniacally. But
and you get a book.
And you
get a book. Okay, so yeah.
And you get a book.
You get to join the Golden Girls kitchen table, and you get a book.
Tip number 1, make sure you're talking to persuadable people. Now, that's hard to know, but if you're part of a program that's doing this well, then your team will have identified folks potentially open to being persuaded one way or another. And those are the doors you're going to be knocking on. Sometimes you'll find a voter who's got a really strong opinion developed already. That's okay. Just move on to the next door, because remember your goal is to talk to persuadable voters. Tip number 2, remember that effective persuasion conversations are about listening. It's not about arguing your facts or saying every word on your script. That means asking questions like, what issues matter to you most? Or what do you think? Tip number 3, build a relationship. I know it's difficult in a short time, and it's very important to be real. So the shortcut here is to use a tactic I call as someone who. Use it and you kind of force yourself to relate. Yes, I understand that as someone who works as a teacher. And remember, it does not need to be extreme, it just needs to be you. Tip number 4, you're not going to persuade someone in 30 seconds on the door. That's okay, because it's not your goal. It's to make a dent and help the person start to see it this way. Because remember, you literally cannot persuade someone. They're going to persuade themselves, and that takes time. Fortunately, your conversation isn't our only shot. It's part of a broader program where the campaign is going to engage the voter many times. Tip number 5, data. Other volunteers are going to be knocking on doors too. And you'll help others just like yourself if you record the information on the walk sheet that you're provided. If you don't do it, the program will likely need to repeat your work.
Hi, welcome to the interview portion of Gaslit Nation. I'm very excited that we're finally posting our interview with writer and cultural critic Senator Harry, which we taped in August. First, I need to explain a few things about this interview and some changes we at Gaslit Nation have since made on the production end. Gaslit Nation is now a fully independent podcast. We've parted ways with Dame Magazine for a variety of reasons, though I'd like to emphasize that while we're no longer affiliated with them, we still encourage you to read the solid journalism Dame is doing on social and political issues. One of the reasons, however, that we parted ways is that Andrea and I were unhappy with the production quality of our early episodes. A key example of the problems we faced is the fact that much of this excellent interview with Senator, which we were so excited about, was rendered inaudible due to poor production. You'll still hear a bit of lackluster audio from me in the following clips, and I apologize for that. But I think that what she's saying is really important, so we hired another editor to clean up the interview and preserve it for you. Because Andrea and I have made Gaslit Nation fully independent, we are now paying the production team ourselves, which means that we're relying on our audience for financial support. We encourage you to subscribe and donate to our Patreon. Even $1 a month makes a difference in keeping us going and allowing us to go weekly. Anyway, back to the interview with Senator. For those of you who don't know, Senator Harry is a writer, cultural critic, scholar of digital media, and prolific tweeter who is well known for her analyses of national and international politics, race, class, feminism, and other topics. Back in the summer of 2014, Senator was among the Black female activists who called out the weaponization of Twitter by hostile actors in real time. These actors were later revealed to be among the operatives mapping the social media landscape for the Kremlin, the Trump campaign, and other dangerous parties. Senator's warnings, much like mine, were ignored or dismissed by most journalists and politicians. Had they not been, and had Twitter cracked down on imposters and mob harassment, we might well be in a different place. There's been a refrain among pundits since 2016 that no one saw it coming. This is frustrating to hear, both because it's a lie and because it shows who they consider to be no one. In 2014, Black women saw it coming and called it out when it mattered, only to have their research presented as a new finding by white men once the Mueller probe kicked off in 2017. Before getting to her interview, I'm going to read the introduction to an article Sadette wrote in June 2014 for Model View Culture called More Than the Message. I want you to think about this in the context of what we face now. So here it goes. We aren't all in this together. The risks, rewards, and danger for bringing about any kind of major change is weighted on prejudice, access, and sometimes sheer luck. The perception that we can form an amazing bond stretching across class, culture, and geography to create moments of fantastic affinity through hashtags, fundraisers, and shared emotion. Find the message, get it out, and get everyone on board. It sounds idyllic, it plays simplistic. The rush to get out the message ignores the real consequences of safety, power, and sustainable support. PR management of these moments of affinity become more important than the policy shifting. In a new media landscape where the old school values of racism, classism, and sometimes well-intentioned but utterly selfish savior complexes run rampant, the necessary care to protect the most vulnerable is slipshod at best, if not absent altogether. That article is from 2014, but we still face the same issues of abuse of power, of lack of compassion, on a new political scale, is witnessed through the rise of neo-Nazis and the abuses of the Trump administration and other repressive parties. In August 2018, I asked Sadette when she knew that the weaponization of social media was helping give rise to these changes.
It's strange for me to say about what I knew because my focus has always been not about what I knew, but who are we talking to? And are we having a good enough conversation that we have some idea of what's going on? I started online because of a family event. My father was deported. I've talked about this. And there weren't people who were talking about it from my perspective. There was a lot of immigration is an idea, and that's come right back around right now. And I'm about to fight everybody and their mama over that, but that's later. But this whole thing of that I don't hear myself. I don't see myself. I don't see myself represented. So I started blogging, and I was part of a Women of Color bloggers group where, again, the idea was we find other people who are having those feelings and we have conversations. It's not about whether or not we're right or wrong, but it's like, are we getting enough perspectives? And for this is while I was working as a retail salesman and tech trainer for Apple. And people would talk about the joy of tech. And I'm like, you know tech when you have to teach someone how to do their email, when you have to teach someone how to help their mom. And that's how you get these real experiences of tech. So a lot of my analysis wasn't kind of high level what I studied, even though what I studied is important. It was very much, this is how I'm dealing with people every day, how they're dealing with tech, and we're not talking to them. I then became community lead of the Coral Project, which was a building better communities around journalism, better comment systems. Everybody went, no, we don't need comment systems. And I've always said, I have no problem with people saying we don't need comments. I have no problem with people saying I don't have the bandwidth to deal with comments. The issue is always, if you don't have comments, how do you have feedback? How do you hear from the people who you are making product with or from or to? And there was this, oh, no. And then the election happens. And everybody goes, oh, shit, we didn't know. And I'm like, I could have kind of guessed this. I wrote an article about cultural surveillance in 2014 about how specifically there was a response to observations by channers and bots of how feminism and the left and progressivism were specifically attacking and undermining and not listening to Black women. And it was about hashtags. And this was when people were getting up in graduation speeches and saying hashtags weren't important.
This is for Model View Culture.
Yes, Model View Culture. And then it suddenly becomes, oh, they're not important, then they're studied, and then suddenly hashtags become a thing, and there's End Father's Day and Sassafras, and people think about it as this larger thing, but I remember our mutual friend who we've sung Guns N' Roses to you online at NASA, that's so true, they were saying they wanted to kill her kids over this thing because she would just go into 4chan and go click, 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 and screen cap it.
Right. And you're talking about the summer of 2014, this sort of eruption of what we now call the alt-right, but basically white supremacists.
Nazis, fascists.
Let's just call it what it is. You know,
but
who
they
are
have
now
such cute haircuts, guys. And they love spaghetti.
So dapper,
like
so
do.
stylish.
Duck Bill Von Goosestep can kiss my ass. And anybody can buy a Brooks Brothers suit. I'm sorry. No, I'm not.
You know, I kind of wanted to talk about that, just to sort of set the scene. You know, now it's 2018. Last year, suddenly, all these quote-unquote experts were testifying about how they had just realized there is this influx of Russian bots, of people hired by Cambridge Analytica, people associated with Bannon, with Trump, etc., who were mass harassing women online, who were mass harassing non-white people online, who were basically trying to...
And I'm both.
And you are both. And who are basically mapping the social media landscape. And they presented this as if it was a revelation. And, you know, I, of course, recall the summer of 2014 very vividly. As do many women, that was the time of Gamergate. It was a time I endured some personal harassment as well. And it was also a time that you and Sassy Krauss, Shafika Hudson, right? That's her real name. So True, Lanasa, what's her last name?
Anassa Crockett, Feminista Jones,
right.
Mickey Candle, Jamie Nesbitt Golden, every black woman who's a journalist who seemed slightly south of middle class,
right,
was going through it.
Right. And so do you want to describe, like, what were you going through? Like, what was happening on Twitter at that time?
I might be a little off, but I think it was around the time that Hugo Schweizer had his big, I admit to... That was either 2013 or 2014, and I admit, and he named specifically me and someone who tweets now is Rust Belt Rebel. And I, in a fit, which is probably like, in a fit is going to be like the subtitle of my description of my years on Twitter. What happened? In a fit, I turned to specifically, I remember it, Jill Filipovic, and I went, so I'm glad that you're taking care of him. What about me? And then right after, Mickey, who is my friend, goes, they're never going to answer that, baby. Solidarity is for white women. We all know that hashtag. It went someplace. And they admit to watching that. And what was very happening is that they noticed that there is a fracture. There is a fissure.
And by they, you mean
the arrests, Nazis, men's rights activists. And this is something I've always wanted to say out loud, is that the fissure was not that we disagree or we have a fight, but the fissure was that we would never address it. We would never sit down, have that come to Jesus meeting at the table, set some rules, come to blows, and deal with it as a family or as a collective or as a movement. We would always go really silent and then go away. And we would say, these are the people who are not taken care of, and these are the people who we can pick off. And that is always the method. You figure out who is not going to be taken care of. You figure out who's most integral or who is most good at looking at what you're not when they're not taken care of. And you keep going. And that's just been the practice. And it's been the practice for 4 to 5 years. And it's infiltrated into, I always tell people, I'm mass comm. I like all mass communication. So religion, TV, media, all of that. But you'll see it pop up in all of these things where it's like, when you look at abuse, when you look at how people are treated, it's about who you don't take care of. So a lot of times people go, well, we're going to take down this person and this person. I'm like, that is, to me, always a terrible strategy. What I want to know is who we're going to take care of, because that's who they're looking for. Because the most important people who are not going to be the people who attain some power. They've already been integrated into the power structure. It's going to be the people who might shift the power structure. And how do we make sure that they do not have those options? Who are we not listening to? And that to me was a very big example of, I think, how it went for the next 4 years. And people talk about the alt-right and the Nazis and the fascists. And I'm always, sometimes I think people think I'm very simplistic, but I'm just like, at the end of the day, I can't control what they do.
Right.
I can only whoop their ass or they can whoop mine. That is pretty much, they've established that with that political standpoint, their goal is my destruction.
Right.
What I can control is what we do, what resources we build. So what are we going to do? So flash forward now, we get a lot of 2018. There are a lot of folks who are like, oh my God, I don't know what is going to happen. And I feel like I'm always like, that's nice. You don't know. So what are we doing? And online, I think we do lose some nuance. People weaponize that word a lot because we can't hear inflection and we can't hear tone and things like that. And that's where what I studied comes up. Is my major was history, my minor is theater. So I get that about whatever people like try to tell me about, well, you don't understand about written communication versus in-person communication. I have a minor in theater. I have 9 years of opera study. Yes, I do understand about it. I can do it in 3 languages. What I'm saying is we at some point really have to turn the focus for what they're going to do. What they're going to do is in general try to destroy us. That's the point. That's the end goal. I know that. What I need to know is what we're doing to protect each other and ourselves. And it gets very interesting because you always turn it when you ask that question. It's just, okay. But we don't like your tone. And I'm like, okay, you're never going to like my tone. You're never going to like my tone. You didn't like my tone when I was nice. You don't like my tone in French. You don't like my tone in Spanish. You don't like my tone when I'm pleasant. You don't like my tone when I use my natural accent. You don't like my tone when I use a British accent. You don't like my tone when I use my mama's accent. You just don't like my tone. That's great. You don't like me. I don't like you. We can agree. We don't like Nazis. What are we going to do? Me and you can fight tomorrow.
Exactly. So what do?
We have hard conversations. We have really hard conversations. And we have discussions that center not what they're going to do, not what the new wild shit that's going to come out 4-5's mouth or whoever's mouth. It's what do we care about? Who do we care about? Why do we care about them? And how are we taking care of them? If they're destroying healthcare, how do we protect healthcare? If they're destroying it at a federal level, how do I look at it at a local level? If people want to give money to fight Trump instead of giving money to a party or parties that can't get it done, start a medical fund. Let's take care of everybody who does that. I learned at the hands of old West Indian church ladies. One of the things I say is that my fundamental strategy at this point is called baby has hat. Does baby have hat? If baby does not have hat, we give baby hat. If I cannot give baby hat, I need to figure out why baby doesn't have hat. So do I need to sew the hat? Is the transportation wrong? Is somebody standing in the middle of the doorway between me and giving the baby a hat? And if I can make it, I can do it in that. And sometimes making sure the baby has hat means if you are standing in the doorway and I need to shoulder tackle you to get you out of the way, that might be part of it. But that's not the focus. I'm willing to fight anybody, but my focus isn't fighting anybody. My focus is, are we doing the thing that we say we care about? If I fight someone in the middle, but that's the thing. And what I find is really difficult to have any of these discussions right now. And I think this is often our online exchanges are so funny because we're like, all these high-minded things, this thing people get started and then we're like, so about Slash and Guns N' Roses and what are we drinking? What are we eating? Are we going to a burlesque show? That is how you continue to do this work. Because if there's no after, if there is no thing that generates and makes you happy, you sit there waiting and hoping for the next fight. People ask me, what is the one thing you want most of all to wake up to? I want to wake up, turn to y'all and go, we were wrong.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Oh, man, we were wrong about that. Oh, we fixed
to be wrong.
Awesome.
Like, I feel like there's this sense of people refusing to even admit that these problems exist. And that's been one of the most challenging things. I mean, that's why Andrea and I started this podcast, because that's gaslighting. And I keep thinking about that going all the way back to 2014, because there's not just this issue of harassment and sort of cliques and infighting and all this kind of thing. There was imposters. And one thing, I think that you're involved in 2014 was when Sassy Crass Shafika, documented
Your slip is showing.
Your slip is showing, which was this hashtag that, well, do you want to explain what it was?
She started, and I really did a lot of the research, but it was very much Black women on Twitter going, you are trying to sound like a Black woman, and because we've actually been Black women all of our lives, this doesn't sound right. That's not how we talk to each other. That's not how we interact. And when you got someone who got a little loud or sounded wrong, or you went to 4chan and you documented it, it was just, you just dropped this in the hashtag, your slip is showing.
Right. Because it was obvious. Like, it was obvious to you guys. And I remember Shafika sent me, data. And I was like, it was obvious to me that this was some sort of organized harassment campaign. And we didn't know exactly where it originated. It seemed to be unfortunate. I think they were calling it Operation Lollipop at that time. I tried, I sent this stuff out to people I knew who were in communications, who were professors, who were computer scientists, because I felt like there was something bad at hand. And you guys obviously felt like there was something bad at hand. And it was dismissed.
Your slip is showing. Even the verbiage of that is very much grounded in a Black Southern femme culture of, you're not ready to be outside yet. I'm first generation American, but one of the things that a lot of this is like, we talk about 2014 as the nexus of this in terms of social media, but this is historic. This is from people are like, we can't believe the racism. And I'm just like, well, I has a degree in history. It could happen here. Magna, 3/5, it is part of the way we've conducted ourselves. When people ask me, when you really look at binary code, I gave a talk at the Museum of Modern Art, and I said, I look at the Treaty of Tordesillas. I look at Spain and Portugal splitting up the world into Spain or Portugal, 1-0, binary code. It's on or it's off. Mind you, everybody involved knows that's horseshit. Everybody's been trading along Arab slave trade routes. The Atlantic slave trade is popping. This is predating Shakespeare. Everyone knows that the world is much bigger than 1-0 Portugal and Spain, but we accept the theater of it. We get the Pope on the stage and he's in the hat and he goes, yay! And we go, okay. And that is as much a part of it as the first time anybody goes to Apple E2 or Lisa, because we code and we create by what we know, by what we've been historically taught. So one tweet, AffectCon is coming up, Affect Conference in Portland, amazing conference. And it was one of my first keynote talks. And they talk about, and my talk was called, Do You Want to Fight or Not? I talk about Blade a lot. A lot of my personality is what happens when you let a 12-year-old girl watch Wesley Snipes' Blade. And there is that fundamental thing of we are who we are, we're going to be this. So we have to be honest about what it is. And I think one of the big issues is that there's so much of this where everyone's trying to find a point to reinvent themselves so that they can enter without being blameless. And for me, the issue isn't that I want to be blameless or that I'm right or wrong. It's that I want to fix this. The fact that I've threatened I've just been open about the fact that there are certain members of the press who should not come within 72 inches of me because that's my exact reach. No, 75. And if you are within my reach, I'm going to try. One time for Farak is not helpful to the discourse, but it's who I am.
Later in the interview, I asked Sadet about the fact that even in 2018, we still have a mainstream media that covers up for Trump instead of covering him, that refuses to call a lie a lie. Even the most incontrovertible statements, Trump is a racist, immigrants are in danger, Russia was involved, are treated as debatable by the same journalists who refused to identify the danger of Trump during the campaign. How do we deal with a press that constantly frames the basis of our reality as subjective, often in a smug or dismissive way?
You stop talking to them. And you also stop pretending that what they're talking about is actually about the discussion. This is why I love studying theater. Look, that you put on a show. You get money for this show. You get to stay important because of the show. And that's the show. And it's important to study the show as a fact of its communications. So it serves a purpose. It does a thing. And we have to acknowledge that. But it also is not the same thing as finding out what people think. Now, some of them are abject racists, and I shouldn't be the one talking to them. I don't think that they need any more high-profile, glittery coverage. We done good. But even in those stories, there are the little bits and pieces that I'm always wondering. We're like, oh, well, yeah, it's hard for me sometimes in my area because these people won't talk to me, and I can't even go to this coffee store. And I'm like, so why haven't I talked to the person in the coffee store that won't let them in? Or that there are black farmers and they're losing their farms, or they're fighting these things, or I have those questions, these questions, the questions of let's actually start having discussions with people, with the news, what's happening, what's going down, how does it affect, what are the actual things people need to know? That is what interests me. That is where my next thing is. I'm like, so if you have a small newspaper, how do I get you to keep that up? If you need to get connected to somebody in another country, how do we get that up? And I want to do it all in the open. I'm not people are like, well, we have to get more people at tables. We want to get people at more things. And I'm like, I agree that person probably will not be me below a certain pay scale because I don't want to. But that there is this deep decision that we have to come up with one mode and then go. We do part of the way that they're working that they are not is, and I say this all the time, if I say something that is analytical or hits too close to the truth or is a question that hews too close to a line of where there may be a fracture point, I don't need an egg timer to clock the bots. You got 90 minutes, 90 seconds sometimes. There'll be a bot in my mention, there's someone in my mention, which means I haven't cleared out Signal accounts. Someone is paying attention. I've been trying to have certain conversations with major leftists and major papers for years. For years now. They will not talk to me.
We talked more about this lack of empathy in the media, particularly in certain callous op-eds put out by columnists who act as if they're not dealing with actual people and don't care about the repercussions of their words. I asked Sadet what can be done, and what I love about her response is that while so many of us, especially this week, have been put in a constant reactive position as we deal with the horror of this administration, she reminds us of what we're fighting for. It's not about what you hate, but what you love.
The ultimate thing is it's mean and it's cruel. And a lot of it is just to what end, to what purpose? And this idea of ultimately it flattens the world so much. There's constantly a discussion of both sides. And I'm like, that is the most reductivist, insulting way to look at this great, big, beautiful, amazing world and say that it's both sides. There are only two. We have dimensions. We have different perspectives. There are people who get along great, who have completely different views. A lot of our jokes are like, the Midwest, far out, Missouri, Ukraine, London. I did theater, stats. But we all have this thing. We are interested in the world. And what bothers me about a lot of this is that these are not folks who are interested in the world. They're not interested in something. They just want to start screaming. That is what Primal Scream Therapy was for. Tears for Fears made excellent songs, but it's been done. What do you love? What do you care about? And I read these things that there's always this, well, it finally made it okay for me to, and I was like, no, that's the shit you tell your therapist. What do you actually love? What do you want to see in the world? And with a lot of these, our side, I hope everyone can visually see the air quotes I'm making, and the other sides, I just want to know what you love. Trying to find what people love. I like working in journalism. I like working in like opening up tech, because what I then look for is, instead of looking for the next person I want to throw a chair at, I look for things like, who's telling me the story of the South? Who's telling me about Appalachia? Who is making archives of Black music? Who is chronicling back Black dance? Who is taking the inability to make a physical museum and putting it on Instagram? Who is chronicling the libraries of Eastern Europe? All of these things, there are things we love. There are things that are important. Who's watching foodways? And these are all things that we could be concerned about. And when you look at those things, when you sit there and say, what do you need to make so that you can have what you love? You have different conversations, you have different strategies, you have different ways of being in the world. And the more you do that, the less space you have for a lot of the other stuff. But it's also not something that you treat as soft. Like, it's loving. You can be loving and kind, but you go back to the idea that sometimes to protect what you love, you gotta be willing to throw some goddamn hands. So if I love Black theater, which you do, and somebody says that Black theater isn't a real thing, they might have to fight me. But I'm not fighting them for the joy of fighting them. I'm fighting them because I love something. And too often, when you talk to these journalists, when you talk to these places and these faces and these spaces, I'm like, what do you love?
Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. And our editor is Nick Torres. If you want to help us, leave a review on iTunes. Every review helps us build our audience.
And check out our Patreon if you like what we do. Thanks for listening.